An objective observer of my beginnings would have probably concluded he's going to be starting life with the odds stacked against him. And that's due to the fact that my mom was 14 years old when she discovered, uh-oh, I'm about to have a baby. My father was in his mid-20s. And actually, I didn't get a chance to meet him until I was 22 years old, for two reasons. One reason is because shortly after he got pregnant with my mother, he disappeared. And the reason why he disappeared is because he was on the run, because he had just robbed a few banks. Eventually, he was caught by the FBI, and he went to jail shortly after I was born. My mother met the man I thought was my father about 3 or 4 months after she found out she was pregnant, when my father obviously was not around anymore. And he became the dad that I would grow up thinking was he became the man I thought was my father. And you think this positive image of an individual, positive person in the community, because he decided to raise another man's child. His family treated me as though I was blood. I didn't know any difference. His mother, his father, that's my mother, my grandfather. His nieces and nephews, to this day, those are my cousins. His brothers and sisters, my uncles, my aunts. In fact, I think, when you look over the entire history of what happened with me and my sister, I think they treated me better than they treated my sister, and she was actually a blood relative. But the man I call my dad, while he may have had a different view to the community, what I saw was a complete horror. I have vivid memories from the time I was 3 years old of hearing my mother scream for help, either coming from her bedroom or from the kitchen or maybe even our living room, only to run in to see what was going on and see my father pick my mother up and slam her on the floor, or throw her against the wall, or have his hands around her neck, or punching her in the face, punching her in her side, or throwing her around like she was some rag doll. And despite my screams and my sister's screams and our cries for him to stop, he continued. To the point that I thought that our screams were actually fueling him to hit her even harder. Now, just to give you a picture of how that may have looked, my dad was about 5'10", maybe about 160, 170 pounds, and my mother, I think at her heaviest weight, was about 98 pounds, and she was 4 feet 11. Her body couldn't take that type of abuse. And I would see her after the assaults, which were numerous, not once or twice a year, but once or twice a month, almost like clockwork. They would get into a fight or argument, and then he would commence to beat her like she had stolen his last dollar. And my mom would try to cover up the abuse. She didn't want anyone to see it. So she would ask me or my sister to go get her some ice so that we can put on her eye so it brings the swelling down. Go get her a face towel so that we can wipe the blood off of her nose or her mouth. She would put makeup on to hide the bruises that she had to her face or to her arms. And then a pair of sunglasses she put on so no one would see the blackened eyes that she had. And they were numerous. And this continued from the time that I was 3 until the time I was 11, where my dad went to jail himself for burglary. So as you can see, I grew up around individuals, male individuals who weren't great role models, unless the role model was for me to become a member of the state penitentiary. And if that wasn't enough, watching the abuse that my father inflicted on my mother, he abused himself in the form of alcohol and drug abuse. So when he wasn't beating my mother, he was high. And my mother, I think to kind of numb the pain, she became addicted to drugs as well. So our house was complete chaos. We had to move frequently. I tell people all the time that if there's a picture of a nomad in the dictionary, it's probably of me and my sister. Moving around actually benefited me when I ran for judge, because I lived on 116th, which is off of Kinsman. I lived on on Union, which is off of 105th. We spent a couple of years in California. I lived on 93rd. I lived on Soika. I spent a lot of time down in the Longwood projects. But because we moved so often, I knew almost everybody in the city of Cleveland. So when I ran for judge, you know, I recognized that name. But when we wound up moving down to Longwood, that's when things escalated in terms of my parents' abuse of drugs and also the neglect that was inflicted upon me and my sister. While most kids used to dread going to school, I loved it. Not only because I did well, but because I knew going to school I would get 2 meals, breakfast and lunch. I will always be a staunch supporter of the free lunch and breakfast programs that are provided by the schools, because had it not been for those programs, there would have been many times that me and my sister would not have eaten. And that was because when we went home, there wasn't much to eat. Because instead of my parents using the food stamps that they had received to purchase money, to purchase food for us, they were converting the food stamps into cash to go and buy more drugs. My sister and I were fighting the roaches for crackers. We were neglected not only when it came to food, but also our clothing. You know, my kids, they don't do this that often anymore, but they used to, maybe because I've told them the story too many times. But they used to ask, you know, well, we need some new clothes. I mean, it's maybe about 3 or 4 months. And I said, well, just imagine, you know, having the same pair of pants for 2 years. I told them I brought the style of skinny jeans way before anybody else brought it. Floods, Michael Jackson, come on, it was Michael Ryan. And I didn't do it on purpose, obviously, but that's what we had to deal with. I washed my clothes out with the soap that most of us bathe with in order to remove the odor that was in the clothes so that my friends would stop talking about me. I didn't go outside when it rained because my shoes had such huge holes in them that my socks would get wet. It was a pretty tumultuous time for us. And what made it even worse was when my father wound up going to jail. Because now, at this point, my mother is back out, and she's out in the streets, and she's not really too much concerned with me and my sister. And so we're pretty much fending for ourselves. And it wasn't until my grandmother, my stepdad's mom, figured out, okay, you know, something is amiss with this picture. And she decided to take my sister and I away from my mother. I saw it as a blessing because I knew going to live with my grandmother, I would be able to have 3 4-course meals. I knew living with my grandmother that when I woke up that night, when I went to bed at night and then woke up in the morning, that my grandmother would be there. There were many times that when I went to bed at night and I woke up in the morning, I was living with my mother and my father, that there was no one at home when we woke up. I'm talking about a 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old, 11-year-old waking up in that type of fear. I knew living with my grandmother that I would be in a stable environment, good home, not moving from neighborhood to neighborhood, from street to street. And so I also thought that it would give my mother the opportunity to get her life in order. That maybe she could go to a rehabilitation center. That maybe she would turn things around and be the mother I always thought that she was destined to be. So after about a year and a half of living with my grandmother, my mother got really sick. And she got sick from something that she contracted from using drugs. And it was in March of 1985, and she was so sick that she had to go to the hospital. And my sister and I went to go visit her. And she, despite all the times that I had seen her beaten up by my dad, or the times I had seen her high after injecting some drugs, I had never seen her that weak before. And my sister and I looked at each other and we started crying. And my mother looked at us in a confused face and said, "Why are you guys looking at me like that? It's not like I'm going to die." And sure enough, her words were prophetic, because a month later, on Easter Sunday, she died. She was 28 years old. I was 13. And it still impacts me today. Died with her that day were my hopes and dreams that she would come back and regain custody of me and my sister. Died with her that day was that she would see me graduate from junior high school. I hadn't even graduated from junior high school yet. My dreams of her seeing me graduate from high school died. Her seeing me graduate from college and law school. Her getting a chance to see Lauren and Michael. They all died that day. And then my grandmother, who had been the rock for me and my sister, not just for that year and a half, but that same year, dealing with my mother's death, she died. And so my head was spinning at this point, because I don't know what's going to happen next. I had to go live with one aunt. That aunt couldn't take care of us, so we had to go move and live with another aunt. After about a year and a half of living with her and my 6 cousins, and two of my cousins had kids of their own, and my grandfather, my aunt told us, "I'm moving to a smaller house, and you and your sister were the last 2 to come, so you guys are the first 2 that have to leave." And thank God that my grandmother, my mother's mom, came back from New York to care for me my last year of high school. By the time I had arrived at Cleveland Heights High, which was at the end of my 10th grade year, Heights was my 11th school. And it counted from kindergarten to 10th grade. No one thought I'd make it. No one thought that I would be able to endure. They probably thought, yeah, he'll probably go to jail. He has role models for that. They thought, yeah, he probably will either sell drugs or be a drug addict. He has role models for that. But become a high school graduate, they didn't think that. To graduate through a gifted and talented program from Cleveland Heights High School, they definitely didn't think that. To get a full ride to a college, never thought that. To receive a scholarship from Cleveland Heights High School, never thought that. To go to Allegheny College and only have to pay or owe $8,000 out of $60,000, they never thought that. They never thought that I would get a scholarship while I was at Allegheny College because of the effort I had put forth in the classroom. Sure enough, didn't think that I would go to law school. Sure enough, didn't think that I would pass while I was in law school and graduate, and definitely didn't think that I would pass the bar on my first attempt to become a lawyer. Definitely didn't think that I would become a prosecuting attorney, a defense attorney, a magistrate at age 30, working with Mayor White and then become a judge at the age of 34. Never thought that based on what they knew I had gone through. I was able to persevere because I refused to let my circumstances define my future. Instead of focusing on excuses, I focused on effort. I refused to let the distractions that engulfed me to become a deterrent to my hopes and dreams of being successful. I was expected to be a statistic, not a standout. I was expected to be a convict and have a sentence imposed against me, not to be the judge doing the sentencing of a convict. I was expected to be an absentee father instead of a model father. I had the power, just like you have the power, to control your own future, my own future, notwithstanding the challenges I faced and that you may face. I am daily reminded of that fact by the picture of President Obama that hangs in my chambers, and I read it every day. And it says, our destiny is not written for us, but by us. When you go to write your destiny, will it be a biography or autobiography? I pray that you will take one of two things from this afternoon's message with you. One is, if you've encountered the same things that I have, then hopefully I'll provide an example of how you can make it. And number two, if you haven't, there's no excuse for you not to be successful in anything you put your mind to. Thank you for your attention and the opportunity to share with